Okay, so moving on to 2.4, we're going to do a little warm up first, a little review, okay? The letters A and B represent non-zero constants. Solve the equation for x. All right, so we have ax minus b equals 50. So that means we want to get x by itself, right? So we want to do the opposite of subtracting, and we want to add b to both sides. And then here we're doing a times x, so we want to divide then by a, right? So we get x equals 50 plus b, whoops, divided by a, okay? All right, now let's solve this equation. So first thing we want to notice is we have 13v minus 9v, so we want to add our like terms, or in this case, subtract, right? So we're going to get 4v minus 15 equals 77. Then we want to work on getting that v by itself, right? So we're going to add 15 to both sides. And we get 4v equals 92. And then we have 4 times v, so that means we want to divide by 4, right? So we get v equals 23. Okay? All righty. Okay, so now moving on to 2.4. So we're going to solve these inequalities. So the only thing that's different for these inequalities versus what we did in 2.2 and 2.3 is these have more than one step. Okay, and then we're going to graph each solution. All right, so we're trying to get y by itself for part A, right? So we're going to subtract 7 from both sides, right? And then because we subtracted 7, do we need to flip the sign? Not yet, right? Remember, you only flip the sign when we multiply or divide by a negative number, okay? So now we have y divided by -6, and we're trying to get the y by itself. So we have to multiply both sides times -6, right? And then we have to flip the sign because we are multiplying by a negative number, right? And then we get y is greater than -12. Now we're going to graph it, right? So are we going to use an open circle or a closed circle here? So remember, when we have greater than or less than, we use an open circle. And when we have greater than or equal to or less than or equal to, we use a closed circle, right? So we're going to use our open circle. Y is greater than -12. So we have our open circle there. And then we're going to shade to the right. And remember, if that does not come intuitively to you, then you can test a point, right? You can test like 0. You can plug in 0 for y and do 0 is greater than -12. And we'd say, is that true? Yes, it is, right? So then 0 has to be in my shaded area. So therefore, I'm shading to the right. Okay. All right, now let's do part B. So what are we going to do first here? We're going to add 4 to both sides, right? And then we're working on getting that v by itself. So we're going to divide by 2. Do we need to flip the sign this time? We do not, correct? So we get v is greater than or equal to 9/2. What's another way of saying 9/2? 4.5, right? And then that's going to help us when we graph it on our number line, right? And are we going to have an open circle or a closed circle here? So here we're having a closed circle because it's greater than or equal to, remember? Okay. And then we're going to shade to the right. Again, we can plug in a number to test if you're unsure. So we are going to plug in 0 is greater than or equal to 4.5. Is that true? It is not, right? So then 0 is not in my shaded area. Okay. So I'm shading to the right of 4.5. All right, let's solve this one. So I have x's on both sides. So I need to make sure I have the x's all on one side and the numbers without variables on one side, right? I'm going to add 5 to both sides. And then we're going to subtract 2x from both sides. So now I have my variable on one side and my number on the other, right? And then I'm going to do what? To get x by itself, going to divide by 4, right? So I get x is less than 4. Okay, and I didn't have to flip the sign because I did not multiply or divide by a negative number. So now do I have an open circle or a closed circle? An open circle. And which way am I shading? Whoops. It didn't tell me to graph it. We're going to just for practice of 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Here's 4. And which one am I shading? Shading to the left this time, right? And we can test a point. We could do 0 is less than 4. Is that true? It is, right? So then 0 has to be in my shaded area. All right. So let's see if we can solve this one. So what should we do first here? So we could add 12 to both sides. You could also add 4 and go the other way. That would be okay too, but we're going to do this way. So negative 4 plus 12 is 8. Then we're going to subtract 3x. So we get 2x is less than or equal to 8. Then what do? We divide by 2, right? So x is less than or equal to 4. And so I'm going to have a point on 4. Is it going to be an open circle or a closed circle? It's going to be a closed circle. And I'm shading to the left, right? And again, if you're not sure, just plug in a point. So plug in 0. And we're going to do 0 is less than or equal to 4. And is that true? It is, right? So then 0 has to be in my shaded area. All right, let's try this one. So negative 4 times 3n minus 1 is greater than negative 12n plus 5.2. Okay, so first, what should we do? So let's go ahead and distribute. You can distribute or you can divide by negative 4. Either one would be fine. Okay. So let's go ahead and distribute. So let's do negative 12n plus 4, right? Because negative 4 times negative 1 is positive 4. Negative 12n plus 5.2. Okay, and then we can add 12n to both sides. And we end up with 4 is greater than 5.2. Well, is that true? That is not true. So this one is no solution. Okay? All right. Let's solve these. Okay? So first we write our inequality, and then we can distribute, right? So 4 times 2b is 8b, and 4 times 3 is 12. Okay? And then we can subtract 8b from both sides, and we end up with negative 3 is greater than 12. Is that true? It is not, right? So this one would also be no solution. Okay, let's try the next one. What should we do first? We can distribute, right? So 2 times 5w is 10w, and 2 times negative 1.2 is negative 2.4. And then we can subtract 10w from both sides. And this one we get negative 2.4 is less than or equal to 7. Is that true? That is true, right? So this answer would be all real numbers because this is always true. Okay, so you'll see a couple like that in your homework. All right, let's try this story problem. The area of the rectangle is at least 140 square centimeters. Find the possible values of x. So how do we find the area of a rectangle again? We do length times width, right? So 3x plus 2 times 10, right? And it's at least 140 square centimeters. So that's going to be greater than or equal to 140, right? And then let's find the possible values of x. So we can go ahead and distribute this through, right? So we get 30x plus 20 greater than or equal to 140. And then we subtract 20 from both sides. And we get 30x is greater than or equal to 120. And then we're going to divide by 30. So we're going to get x is greater than or equal to 4. Okay, and we're just finding the possible values of x. So it's 4 and anything above that, right? Okay, very good. So here's your suggested weekly schedule for this week. All right, so now you should be able to do all of 2.1, 2.2, 2.3, and 2.4, okay? Right.